Today I'm going to talk to you about how to measure a mat. It's not a complicated process, but you do kind of have to understand where you're headed and what it includes, and you need to think about the math involved with it. A mat is a decorative border placed around a picture to serve as a frame. This is a piece of mat board, and it's been cut. It's a thick cardboard piece. You can use poster board or any variety of things. But you have to consider a couple of things. You're going to have an image. So whatever size image you're going to have, we have to cut a window or a hole for it, and then you're going to have a bordering mat around it. So we have to figure out how big does this mat need to be and how big does the window have to be so that we can get this all calculated. First thing you need to take into consideration is, what do you want the viewer to see? It may be that you want them to see everything you've done. It may be that you decide a small portion of the image is what you really want to use. So let's take a look at one where you may not want to use the whole piece. Here's a sketch out of someone's sketchbook, and my suggestion is to use scraps of paper to locate your composition. If you look at the paper cutter in the room, there's usually some scraps of paper sitting there that work perfectly for this, or you could cut papers or use rulers or anything else that would block your image. So if I take these strips of paper and I lay them down to try to figure out what do I want my composition to be. So if I want to frame this, it looks a little different if I frame it really tight than it does if I give it a little airspace. So you have to decide what you want. So figure out what you'd like it to look like, okay? And then you would end up measuring. That's going to be your image size, and we'll come back to this in a minute. If you have, that's when you're using a lot, just a small piece of the area. If you have a picture that you might want to include all of it, you may end up not having to measure a whole lot of information. We'll talk about that in a second. All right. When you're doing this, I would say a minimum size for your mat, the pieces around it, would be a minimum of 2 inches. There are several ways of matting, but I'm going to say for this year, let's go with a minimum of 2 inches. So you're going to have to figure out, what's my opening going to look like, and then we have to consider we're going to add a 2-inch mat all the way around it. All right, so we go back to that first image, and we decide what we want it to look like. Okay, so here she is. I like her with a little more airspace and a little off center. Okay, so I want to calculate the size, height, and width of this image. All right, so I'm going to measure that, and I'm going to average it to about 1/4 of an inch. I don't have to be real specific. So this image right now is 4.5 inches tall, so I'm going to put 4.5 in my formula, and I'm going to go, how wide did I want that? Let's put this back together again. 4.5 tall and 3.25 wide. So I'm going to put 4.5 tall by 3.25 wide, and then I'm going to add the sizes: 2 inches to the side, 2 inches to the side, 2 inches to the top, 2 inches to the top. So I'm not going to just add 2 to it. I'm going to add 2 plus 2. So my image size was 4.5 tall, and then I have to consider 4.5, and I'm going to add 2 inches for the top and 2 inches for the bottom. So I'm going to add 4 more inches, and then I had it 3.25 wide. So I'm going to go 2 inches for the side and 2 inches for the other side. So I'm going to add 4. That would make the outside edge of this piece 8.5 by 7.25. That would be the size of my mat. I'm going to cut the outside edge to 8.5 by 7 1/4 at the paper cutter. I'm going to measure in, I'm going to have an opening of 4 1/2 by 3 1/4 for the opening. This will be the math for that piece. If you have, let's do another one. All right, back to this one. All right, so let's say we want to use most of this, but I don't like this little brown area over here, so I'm going to be sure I crop that off. And it's got some tears in it that I need to be sure don't get part of that frame. And maybe I don't like all that reflection. Do I like that best? Do I like it better? Oh, I like it better that way. Sometimes all our drawing doesn't have to be part of the image. Let's figure this one out. All right. So we're going to measure this to be 8 1/2. So our image size is 8 1/2 by 8 1/4 plus 2 inches to the left, 2 inches to the right, so plus 4, 2 inches to the top, 2 inches to the bottom, plus 4, so that would be half, and that would be 12 1/2, and this would be 12 1/4. If you have an image that you want to see as much of it as possible, here we have an image that's, the image is edge to edge, a beautiful job. We want to see the full image. You need to be sure that you leave enough space that you're going to be able to tape it in that hole, because if you make the hole the size of the image, it's going to just fall through the mat. So we need to make it a 1/2 inch at least smaller than the mat. You could go a little bit more if you are willing to crop it. This image is 9 by 9, which means I need to make the opening of it 8 1/2 by 8 1/2. So I would do the math for this one this way. It was 9 by 9, but I need to subtract a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to make it 8 1/2 for the opening on both sides, and then I would add 2 to the right, 2 to the left, so that's a 4-inch mat, 2 to the top, 2 to the bottom, so it's a 4 inches of mat. So this would be 12 1/2 by 12 1/2. And that's how I would measure those mats. Good luck.